Brachot, second chapter, third Mishnah. הקורא את שמע ולא השמיע לאוזנו. Now, like we said in Judaism, you cannot do Judaism in a spiritual manner. Everything has to be physical. So when one says the Shema, if one says the Shema only in his brains or in his heart, it doesn't count. One has to have it physically, said it physically with voice. Especially Shema, which means hear. More than any other. What?
What does a mute do?
A mute, somebody who cannot talk. So we'll see soon. Good question. הקורא את שמע ולא השמיע לאוזנו. Somebody who recited the Shema and he didn't hear his own words, שקרא בלחש, he said it quietly. ולא שמע בעצמו מה שהוציא מפיו. He did not hear what he actually said. But he did move his lips. יצא, he did his obligation. ידי חובתו. He made his obligation. Rabbi Yossi אומר, Rabbi Yossi says, לא יצא. He did not do his obligation. So disagreement. If one did his obligation, if he did not hear his own voice, or he didn't. לא יצא ידי חובה קריאת שמע. He did not do his obligation of Shema. שנאמר, because Shema is different than other davenings. Over here it says Shema, which means hear. השמע לאוזניך, which means hear, listen in your ears, מה שאתה מוציא מפיך, whatever you bring out from your mouth. So if that's what the Gemara says, how would the first guy says that you did your obligation? How does he learn the Shema? And to him, Shema doesn't mean hear. So how does he learn it? Beram, Tana Kama Doresh, the first Tana, he learns Shema. He says Shema doesn't mean that you need to hear. Over here, Shema means understand, more of the warning of understanding than of hearing. It's a spiritual Shema. It's not a physical Shema. Like I say, you hear me?
Yeah,
do you understand me? It means understand. So what does it mean? Shema. בכל לשון שאתה שומע. It means you should say it in any language that you hear it, that you understand it. כלומר, which means, שמותר לאדם לקרוא שמע בכל שפה שהוא מבין בה. It says that a person is allowed to read the Shema in any language that he understands. Rabbi Yossi Stam, Rabbi Yossi, when it says Rabbi Yossi Stam, הוא Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. It is Rabbi Yossi, the son of Chalafta. And ההלכה כתנא קמא. The law is like Tana Kama, that what? That even if you don't hear, as long as you moved your lips, you did your obligation. ודווקא בדיעבד יצא, and it says it's only you did your obligation when you didn't notice. Not that you did it on purpose, you didn't hear, you didn't say it. You didn't notice or you didn't whatever. אבל לכתחילה, but from the beginning, if you want to do it properly, צריך שישמיע לאוזנו. You should listen to it with your ears. So even the Tana Kama says that you did your obligation, it doesn't mean that you should do it like this. It just means that if you did it the wrong way and you didn't listen to it, you still did your obligation. But you should always say it out loud enough so you can hear. Next. קרא שמע, what happens if a person read the Shema ולא דקדק באותו יותר? But he wasn't careful with all the letters. He wasn't careful with exactly how to say it correctly. לבטא אותם כראוי, to pronounce them the right way. שלא הפריד בין שתי אותיות שוות. When he didn't separate between two similar letters. כגון, for example, when you have two words in the Shema that ends in the same letter and you say them quick. Sorry, the one word ends in a letter and the next word starts with the same letter. So I'll give you an example. It says on your hearts, right? So on your hearts in Hebrew is al, on is al, heart is levavecha, your heart. Al ends with a lamed and levavecha starts with a lamed. See, al.
Like slurring your words in English.
So let me give you the example. Yeah, let me give you an example. So when you say it quick, you can say it a levavecha. A levavecha. In other words, you only have one letter in between instead. So the way you're supposed to say it is al, pause, and then levavecha. So you'll have two lameds. When you say it al levavecha, you just have one lamed over there.
You're not fully pronouncing the...
That's right. You're either pronouncing the end of the first word or the beginning of the second word. But which one are you doing? Nobody knows because you just said one sound. And that happens on many occasions in the Shema. So he says for things like this, one has to be particular. You have to pause. Al levavecha, not al levavecha.
That's why it says in the Siddur too, this verse must be recited with extreme concentration.
That's right.
Focus.
That's right. Or another example, Esev besadecha. You ends with the bet and it starts with the bet. Vechadome v'nimtza mevatam kot achat. And then he's pronouncing them like one letter. So somebody read the Shema and he wasn't careful. He read it fast. He wasn't careful. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yatsa. Rabbi Yossi said he did his obligation. Yasa yedei chovato. He did his obligation. He doesn't need to do it again. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yatsa. Rabbi Yehuda says he did not do his obligation. Ha'alacha ke Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. That what? That he did not do his obligation. Beram bat lechatchila tzarich ledakdek beotiyateh. So one has to be very careful in the way you say it. ולהיזהר שלא להבליע אותן אחת בחברתם באותיות שוות או דומות, to make sure that you do not say two letters as one. וכן יש לבטא כראוי את האות הדגושה ואת האות הרפה, and also you have to pronounce the letters that have a dagesh, like bet and vet. Yeah, one bet has a dat, the other one does not have a dat. So a lot of people say them exactly the same. It says no. One has to be a bet or a pay or fay, or hashvana ve'et hashvanach, or the emphasis on the word is if it's the beginning of the word, or the emphasis is in the middle of the word, or whatever it is. One has to be very careful. V'chayotze baze, and similar to this. Okay. Next section. Hakore lemafreya. Somebody who reads the Shema out of order. שהקדים את הפסוק המאוחר, that he took the later verses and he put them first. כגון שקרא תחילה את הפסוק, for example, he read in the beginning the verse, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, and you should write them on the doorposts of your houses and your gates, ואחר כך קרא את הפסוק שלפניו, and then he read the previous verse. וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטופות בין עיניך וכיוצא בזה. In other words, he mixed up the orders of the verses. לא יצא, he did not do his obligation. So even though you said the whole thing, since it was out of order, you didn't do the obligation. לא יצא ידי חובת קריאת שמע, he didn't do the obligation of reading the שמע, שנאמר, because it says, והיו הדברים האלה. Because the שמע, it says, it in itself says, and these things were. והיו, and these things were. ודרשו והיו, and they were. What's the word? And they were these things. בהווייתם יהיו. It means, and they were exactly the way you find them. In other words, don't change their being. When you change their being, you change it. כלומר, שיקראו כפי סדרם בתורה. You should read them according to the way they are in the Torah. ברמב"ת המקדים פרשה לפרשה. But if in the verse we have the passages, yeah, and in the passages you exchanged the verses within the passages. What about if you put one passage in front of the other passage?
So, like if you read the Tizit portion right after you say Shema.
That's right. For example, כגון שהקדים פרשה. That's exactly the example he gives. כגון שהקדים פרשת ציצית, for example, that he reads the פרשת ציצית, the parsha of ציצית, לפרשת והיה עם שמוע, to the portion of, and it was if you go and listen to my voice, יצא ידי חובתו, then he did do his obligation. לפי שסדר הפרשיות בקריאת שמע אינו כסדרן בתורה. Because the way the parashiyot in Shema is not the way it is in the Torah. So anyway, they're not the way they're supposed to be. We already explained why they put it in that way. So that's when you're okay. ומה ששנינו במשנה הקודמת שיש סדר לפרשיות קריאת שמע, and the fact that we already learned why which parsha, which passage comes before another. It doesn't mean that you didn't do this obligation if they're not like that. That's the way you should do it. But if you didn't do it that way, you still did your obligation. But if you didn't do it the right way, you still did your obligation. Next. What happens if you read the Shema and you made a mistake? You skipped a word, or al pasuk echad, or you skipped the whole verse. So what do? You should go back to the place you made a mistake. What do you mean to the place? To the beginning of the verse, not the beginning of the word. The beginning of the verse you made a mistake in. And you read from there onwards. According to the way. In the Gemara it explains, he made a mistake between passage and passage. He knows that he finished one portion, and he needs to start another portion, but he doesn't remember which portion is the next one. He should always go to the first chapter, to the first separation, and he should start, and it should be, if you listen to my voice, Rashi. והרמב"ם כותב, חוזר לפרשה ראשונה שהיא ואהבת את השם. Rambam says, you should go back to, and you should love your God. So, in other words, you go all the way to the beginning or all the way to the passage. טעה באמצע הפרק, what if you made a mistake in the middle of the chapter? כגון שיודע באיזו פרשה אתה, he knows which passage the mistake is in. In the beginning he didn't even know which passage it is. Now he knows which passage it is. אבל אינו יודע באיזה מקום בתא. But in that passage he doesn't know what the mistake is. חוזר לתחילת הפרק. He has to go back to the beginning of that passage. לתחילת הפרשה שטעה בו. Next. טעה בין כתיבה לכתיבה. He made a mistake. There's two passages where it says וכתבתם לאות על ידיך. וכתבתם מזוד ביתך. So it says, in these two passages, it has a different ending. And a lot of people say it by heart, and since they mix the ending of the first passage to the second passage. Right? What does it mean? שיודע שצריך לומר וכתבתם. He knows he needs to say וכתבתם, ואינו זוכר אם הוא עומד פרשת שמע. In פרשת שמע, after כתבתם, there's one word. In פרשת והיה עם שמוע, after כתבתם, there's a different word. והיה עם שמוע, יחזור לכתיבה הראשונה. So in other words, he knows that he's in one of them. He doesn't remember which passage וכתבתם is. So you should go to the earlier passage. Obvious. יחזור לכתיבה הראשונה, you should go to the first writing. יתחיל ומכתבתם של פרשת שמע. You should start from מכתבתם of פרשת שמע. ברעם. But אם מתעורר אצלו ספק לאחר שכבר אמן למען ירבו ימיכם, but if he already says the words so that there will be many in your days, and this is, you say it in the second passage, not in the first passage, since he already said these words, and now comes the idea, did he make a mistake or not? אינו חוזר, we're not going to come to bring him back. Why? שעל הרגל לשנו הוא הולך, because we assume he said the right thing, because this is already went with his tongue.